Hello, my name is Dzwonkowska. I'm a head of the Center for Circular Economy and Applied Ethics, and today with me in the studio is my fellow colleague from the center, Professor David Gunkel, which I'm glad to see you in Poland and to teach here. I wanted to ask because recently you have published a new book which is entitled Person, Thing, Robot, a Moral and Legal Ontology for the 21st Century and Beyond. So, what is this book about? What is the robot in this book?
Right, so good question. So the book is about less about the technology and more about us, more about the way that we organize our moral and our legal world in order to respond to the opportunities and the challenges of innovative and emerging technology like AI and robots. And the real challenge, I think, is for us to decide whether or not these technologies are going to be just things, tools, instruments, objects, or whether we might need to accord to them a certain status where they become a subject of law and ethics as a kind of person. And the book is really about working through these two options, seeing how well or not as well the robot fits in the category of thing, and the same with regards to person. And just to give you a spoiler alert, I don't think robots should be persons, but I also think thing is a little too restrictive. And so we might need to have a little more fine-grained or nuanced understanding of these categories so that we have not just person and thing, but person, thing, and a lot of stuff in between to accommodate a lot of these new technologies.
So would it be a little bit comparable to De Grazia's concept of borderline person, or sort of?
Kind of, yeah. In fact, it's not just about robots and AI. You can see already in environmental law and environmental ethics. This is happening with rivers and mountains, where we're trying to protect these environmental entities by granting them a kind of status where they're not just things that are raw materials that we can utilize, but they're also not full persons either. And trying to come up with a framework for understanding the challenges that we face with the environmental crisis, but also with these new technologies, I think is really crucial for our future.
And what do you think, whether if we would have this frame for let's say, making a robot some sort of a person to address legal issues, would it be, do you think that it could be an international agreement so that in many countries you have same understanding, or could be rather that in some countries robot could be seen as responsible for something, while in others not really?
Yeah, this is the case with corporate personhood right now. Corporate personhood is recognized globally, but it's done a little bit differently in different jurisdictions. It's also the same with environmental entities. So I'll just give you a really interesting example. In the United States, Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes, is considered a person in the city of Toledo for the protection of the lake. On the other side of the lake in Canada, it's not a person. And so the same lake
Right.
is and is
Yeah.
not, right? And it just has to do with the legal differences in the way that different jurisdictions craft their laws to respond to a lot of these challenges that we're facing.
So what about, this is the legal perspective. What about human perspective, how we people should treat robots?
Yeah, this is also, I think, really intriguing because we often think, well, it's not that difficult. It's a thing. So just treat it as a technology, and it's like your calculator, it's like your toaster, it's like your calculator. Turns out that that doesn't play so well with these socially interactive and somewhat intelligent devices. One good example is when we have these devices like Alexa or Siri that can talk to us. We actually thank them. We ask Alexa for some information, and then we say, "Thank you, Alexa." Well, we don't thank our calculator for making a calculation. We don't thank our hammer for helping us build a house, but we do thank these things. And we thank them because they have social presence. They use language. They have a kind of perspective in our minds as another social entity. This is also happening with soldiers that work with robots in the field of battle. So we have these explosive ordnance disposal robots that the US soldiers were using in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the commanders thought, well, they're just a tool to help get the job done. But it turned out the soldiers that work with these robots actually liked them and made them a member of their team. So they gave them names, they gave them battlefield promotions, they even risked their own lives to save that of the robot. And when their little robot was destroyed defusing a bomb, they'd collect all the pieces and put it in a box, send it back to the manufacturer and say, we want our Scooby-Doo back. And that's because this robot had a role to play in that unit, and that role meant that they were a teammate and not a tool. And so I think the robot is really challenging us to look at these technologies a little bit differently than we have previous forms of technology.
So what are the other challenges that we could meet with robots? Is it, now you have mentioned a few cases where robots were used as a tools. Is it possible that they will use us as tools?
I think it's possible. I'll give you an example of where this has happened. When DeepMind created AlphaGo, they had this Go playing algorithm, but they needed a human being to move the pieces on the board at the time that the algorithm was playing against Lee Sedol of South Korea. And that kind of was an inversion of the usual relationship. Now the human being was the instrument of the algorithm, and the algorithm was the deciding factor. And so we can see ways in which this is already occurring, but I think a lot of the worries about the robot uprising and the robots taking over, I think is science fiction and not actually science fact.
In your book, Machine Question, you have compared a little bit things with rights for robots and how the ontological status of the robots and animals. Is there any comparison?
Right. So we have always thought of ourselves as being the center of the moral universe. And a lot of Western thinking in moral philosophy has really been human-centric. That sort of changed in the 20th century as we realized that animals might also have a certain sort of need to be protected, or even animal rights that we need to recognize. And the robot, because it emulates a lot of the behaviors of animals, also, I think, challenges us to think about the human-centric way of thinking and whether or not we need to open up the ability to grant certain protections and certain welfare or status to the robots. And this is not really about the robot being like an animal able to feel pain. I don't think robots feel pain. We did a lot of work in animal ethics using pain as sort of the benchmark. But I think the reason why we need to think about it in terms of robots is it really is about us protecting ourselves and letting these things be dealt with in a way that makes sense for our current legal and moral practices. So I'll give you a pretty good example of where this is already happening. In the US, 12 of the states have laws now that recognize delivery robots that are on the streets. We have these little robots that deliver food and they're on the street. And when they're in the crosswalk, we want to sort of figure out how to mitigate an accident where a car may hit one of these robots. And so we have these laws that now grant to the robot the rights and responsibilities of a pedestrian when it's in a crosswalk. Now, this is not giving the robot the right to vote or any other big rights, but it's a small right, the right of a pedestrian. But it's a way of making our current laws fit a new technological situation. And we need to, I think, take very seriously the ways in which our legal statutes and our deciding mechanisms deal with these new entities that are going to be on our streets, in our houses, in our workplace, and come up with a framework for understanding how we are to relate to them, but also how they relate to us.
So you mentioned the pain as being this factor that we decide these animals we include into our moral circle, this we exclude. So is there anything that we could say about general AI or robots that could be this criteria to include or exclude from moral?
Yeah, so this is where I think things get a bit different. With animals, we can certainly say that they're sentient, maybe even conscious, and they do experience pain. It's very clear, and we can measure it. And that makes them a lot like us. And so the extension of either moral status or some legal protections to the animal sort of follows in that sort of natural person way of thinking. But we also have legal persons, like corporations. And we've made corporations legal persons not because they're conscious, not because they feel pain, not because they're sentient, but because we need to deal with them as another legal entity. We want to sue them for bad outcomes. We want to hold them responsible for their conduct. And as a result, we've used this fiction of legal personhood to be able to situate them within our legal practice. I think AI is going to be more like the corporation and less like the animal. Even if the animal gives us some preliminary ways of thinking about this, I think the pattern that's going to be utilized for actually making decisions is going to be following much more the legal personhood pattern than the animal law business.
And what are the areas? We speak about personhood, but we already see that in a way AI is becoming closer and closer in terms of reason and making dealing with big data using reason. We could see that AI is very good in using language for
Yes.
the translator, all these language tools. Is there any area which is specifically reserved for human being at the moment?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think we are playing a losing game, in a sense. We draw the line in the sand and we say robots and AI shall never do this. So we used to say they'll never play chess. Well, they played chess. And we said they'll never control a car autonomously. Well, now we have self-driving cars. And we said, well, they'll never use language the way we do. Now they're using language very similar to the way that we do in terms of the outcome. I think the last line of defense probably is creativity. We often think about creativity as being uniquely human and being something that makes us somewhat special. But again, I think we can see the way that AI is sort of threatening that boundary with things like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, and DALL-E now generating original images, some other algorithms making original music, making original video, and beginning to make us question not only whether we look at creativity as being anything special, but maybe even needing to redefine what we mean by creativity, because now we have algorithms that seem to do things that we thought only we could do just a couple years ago.
So being artist is only future safe job.
So I don't think artists are going to lose their jobs, but I think artists have to think very seriously about how to collaborate with these new algorithms. I think often we look at the way that artists work with technology as that's a tool, like a paintbrush or a guitar or a camera. And that's just the means by which the artist does something to create his or her artwork. I think we're now looking at a situation in which the AI that we are inventing and the robots that we're creating are going to be less tools that artists use and more collaborators and teammates in making collaborative work. And we see a number of experiments in literature, in poetry, and also in music, where artists are now beginning to work very closely and very collaboratively with the algorithm.
Does this advice applies only to artists, or is this we or robots, or more how to collaborate with robots?
I think it applies to every field. You can already see this in areas that are not as creatively oriented as the arts. For example, journalism. Already a lot of reporting that is done in print and online is written by an algorithm, whether it be financial reports or sports stories or even some basic reporting on political events. And I think journalists have known this for quite some time, and they're already beginning to transform not only the way they do their work, but also transform the curriculum in the journalism schools, recognizing that if we teach journalism the way we did a decade ago, we're not preparing our students for a future in which the algorithm is going to be working alongside them. So instead of competing with the algorithm, I think we have to teach them how to collaborate and make the most use of these technologies in their own work.
So training ourselves in collaboration is one of the challenges. Are there any other challenges for future for us in terms of AI?
So I think there's a number of challenges. Right now you can see everywhere in the world, in China, the US, and the EU, attempts to create some regulatory environment for AI. And I think that's crucial. I think we just cannot let the market sort this out and say, we'll wait and see what happens. I think the powerful corporations that are creating these algorithms have an interest in maximizing profit and in getting their services and their products out there to the public. But there are some concerns with safety, responsibility. There are concerns with jobs and job protection. If we lose all these jobs right away, what are people going to do? What occupations are available? So I think there needs to be a better level playing field that sort of rights the asymmetries in power that are being recognized in the field. I'm also a bit concerned with the monopolization in the development of these technologies. Right now, most of these are being developed by Google, Amazon, OpenAI, very large multinational corporations, and there's not a lot of smaller players in the mix. And I think we're losing competition in creating these monopolies, and we are then beholden to one very powerful organization who will supply the algorithm or the service that goes along with the algorithm. So I think we have to also have some form of trade regulation on these monopolies to make sure that they're not gaining too much market share and really precluding open competition.
And these are challenges. So what are opportunities?
So opportunities, I think, we're living in a really interesting and exciting time. If you're an artist, there is so much happening in the use of these algorithms in the various arts. And I think the nice thing is most of these big corporations have opened up their services to let people try them, to experiment with them. And so we're in this moment of time of vast experimentation in AI, which I think can be really useful and really informative. But it's not just in the arts. We see it in business, we see it in legal practice, we see it all over every single sector. And there is no job, no occupation, no career that isn't going to be touched by this technology. And that means we're all engaged in this grand social experiment of how we want to incorporate this technology into our world and what we can do with it. And I think, the smart money is on jump in. Start using it, see what it can do, and see what it empowers, but also see, what the threats are and, where the dangers are, because that will give us, I think, a better sense of what our future could look like and how to best apply ourselves to making a situation in which we flourish as individuals, but also as a community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, David, for this inspiring interview and telling us what are chances and opportunities with the development of new technologies. If you want to learn more, I strongly recommend the book that has been published by MIT. You can learn more about the relation between robot thing and person. Thank you.